To kids, summer isn't just time off. It's time spent building confidence and curiosity. But when school meals pause, millions of kids lose access to the food they count on during the school year. As a neighbor-led network, Feeding America is deeply rooted in every community, ensuring summer meals continue nourishing growth and potential. Your support puts healthy food within reach, fueling the future for kids and their families. Give now at feedingamerica.org/summerhunger.
Hey listeners, this is Peter and welcome back to the History Shorts. Today's episode is brought to you by the Podcast Republic, your ultimate listening app. Discover and subscribe to thousands of podcasts from around the world. Download Podcast Republic today, available on Google Play and the Apple App Store. Today on History Shorts. On the evening of April 28, 1881, a 21-year-old man sat in a second-floor room of the Lincoln County Courthouse in New Mexico Territory, shackled hand and foot, awaiting execution. He had been sentenced to hang in 3 weeks. 2 armed deputies were guarding him. The sheriff was out of town. By the following morning, both deputies were dead. The prisoner was gone. His name was William Henry McCarty, known to history as Billy the Kid. And what he did that evening in Lincoln, New Mexico, has been argued about, mythologized, and debated for nearly 150 years. Our history brief today returns to some Hollywood versus history. A quick word from our sponsors.
Ahora en Lowe's, recibe cotizaciones más rápido en nuestro Pro Desk. ¿Tienes una lista de materiales escrita a mano o en foto? ¡Perfecto! Tráela y recibe una cotización lista en minutos. Y si no ves lo que necesitas en la tienda, te lo conseguimos. Desde el Pro Desk, accede a miles de productos más allá de lo disponible en la tienda y en Lowe's.com. Obtén cotizaciones más rápido y consigue lo que necesitas para sacar tus proyectos adelante. Así de fácil, en Lowe's.
This day in history. On June 6, 1944, Allied forces landed on the beaches of Normandy in the D-Day invasion, launching the largest amphibious assault in history and beginning the liberation of Western Europe from Nazi occupation. On June 6, 1968, Senator Robert F. Kennedy died from wounds suffered in the assassination attempt the night before, cutting short a political career many believed could reshape the nation. Story of the day. The real Billy the Kid was born around 1859. The exact date and place are disputed, but most historians now place his birth in New York City, probably in the Irish immigrant neighborhood of Lower Manhattan. His mother, Catherine McCarty, was a widow who moved west, seeking better circumstances. First to Indiana, then to Kansas, then to New Mexico Territory, where she died of tuberculosis in 1874. Billy was approximately 14 years old, and he was on his own. What followed over the next 7 years was a life shaped by the particular violence and lawlessness of the post-Civil War frontier, a world in which the institutions of law were new, contested, and often indistinguishable from the interests of the powerful men who controlled them. Billy was not, by the evidence available, the cold-blooded killer of legend. He was a young man with considerable charm, genuine loyalty to those he considered friends, and a capacity for violence that the world he inhabited both required and rewarded. The number of men he killed is itself a matter of historical debate. The legend says 21, one for each year of his life. The documented evidence, however, supports somewhere between 4 and 9. Both numbers are significant. Neither, however, is 21. The event that defined Billy's outlaw career was the Lincoln County War, a range conflict in New Mexico Territory between 1878 and 1879 that was, at its core, a struggle for economic dominance between 2 competing commercial factions. On one side was the Lawrence Murphy and his associates, a group of merchants and ranchers with powerful political connections who effectively controlled commerce in Lincoln County. On the other was John Tunstall, a young English rancher who had arrived in New Mexico with ambitions to break Murphy's monopoly. Billy worked for Tunstall. He was one of a group of young men that Tunstall employed as ranch hands and cattle guards, men who called themselves, with the self conscious romanticism of the frontier, the Regulators. In February of 1878, Tunstall was murdered by a posse affiliated with the Murphy faction. Billy was present when it happened. He watched it all. And whatever trajectory his life might otherwise have followed, Tunstall's murder set him on a course from which there was no return. The Regulators declared themselves a posse under a sympathetic local justice of the peace and began pursuing Tunstall's killers, operating in that ambiguous frontier space between legal authority and vigilante justice that characterized so much of the Lincoln County War. Billy killed for the first time during this period. He would not be the last man standing when it was over. The Lincoln County War burned itself out by 1879. Billy found himself on the wrong side of a territorial government that had ultimately aligned with the Murphy faction's successors. He was an outlaw with a price on his head. Cattle rustling, murder charges, moving through the territory on the margins of legitimate society. The man tasked with bringing him in was Patrick Floyd Garrett, a tall former buffalo hunter who had been elected sheriff of Lincoln County in 1880, specifically because the territory needed someone capable of dealing with Billy the Kid. Garrett was persistent, intelligent, and not given to the kind of theatrical confrontation that frontier mythology preferred. He tracked Billy systematically. In December of 1880, he cornered Billy and his gang at Stinking Springs, New Mexico, a patient siege that ended with Billy's surrender after one of his companions was killed and the rest decided the situation was hopeless. Billy was tried, convicted of the murder of Lincoln County Sheriff William Brady, and sentenced to hang on May 13th, 1881. He was transferred to the Lincoln County Courthouse to await execution. Two deputies, James Bell and Bob Ollinger, were assigned to guard him. What happened on the evening of April 28th, 1881, has been reconstructed from witness accounts, physical evidence, and Billy's own subsequent statements, none of which agree on every detail. The broad outlines are, however, consistent. Billy asked to be escorted to the outhouse, a routine request. On the way back, he slipped one hand free of his handcuffs. His hands were notably small, a physical detail that became part of the legend. He attacked Deputy Bell on the staircase. Bell was shot with his own gun, with Billy's freed handcuff, or in a struggle on the stairs, depending on which account you credit. He fell. Billy moved to a window overlooking the yard below. Deputy Ollinger, who had been across the street at a hotel, heard the shot and came running. Billy was waiting at the window with Ollinger's own shotgun, which had been left in the courthouse. He called down to Ollinger. Ollinger looked up. Billy fired both barrels. He then spent approximately an hour at the courthouse, breaking free of his leg shackles with a pickaxe, reportedly chatting with bystanders who watched in stunned silence, even dancing on the porch, before riding out of Lincoln on a borrowed horse. He was free. He had 3 months. Pat Garrett tracked him to Fort Sumner, New Mexico, where Billy had friends, romantic connections, and a life he apparently could not bring himself to entirely abandon. On the night of July 14th, 1881, Garrett sat in a darkened bedroom of a local rancher named Pete Maxwell, waiting. Billy entered the room. He did not see Garrett in the darkness. He spoke. Garrett fired twice. One shot struck Billy in the chest. He was dead within minutes. He was 21 years old. The legend of Billy the Kid began almost before his body was cold. Dime novels, stage shows, and eventually films turned him into something the historical record barely supports: a romantic outlaw hero, a symbol of freedom and resistance against corrupt authority. The real Billy was younger, however, was more complicated, and considerably less glamorous than the legend. The History Brief. Today on some Hollywood versus history. Few historical epics are as visually stunning or as emotionally effective as The Last Samurai. Starring Tom Cruise, the film tells the story of an American Civil War veteran who travels to Japan in the 1870s and becomes immersed in the world of the samurai during the final years of their decline. It is beautifully shot, emotionally powerful, and historically, as is usually the case, fascinating mix of truth and fiction. Let's start with the biggest misconception. Despite the title, the movie is not really about Tom Cruise's character, Nathan Algren, at all becoming the last samurai. In fact, the phrase more accurately refers to the samurai class itself, and especially the rebel leader Katsumoto, played by Ken Watanabe. And Katsumoto wasn't real, at least not exactly. The character is largely inspired by Saigo Takamori, one of the most famous samurai in Japanese history. Saigo led the Satsuma Rebellion in 1877, a real uprising of disaffected samurai against the rapidly modernizing Meiji government. That part is true. During the late 19th century, Japan underwent dramatic transformation, known as the Meiji Restoration. The government abolished the old feudal system, modernized the military, industrialized the economy, and increasingly embraced Western technology and institutions. The samurai class, once the military elite of Japan, lost many of its privileges in the process. So the movie's central tension is historically grounded, tradition versus modernization. But Hollywood simplifies the reality considerably because, they have to fit it into a 2 hour or so movie. The film portrays the samurai almost as peaceful, spiritual warriors defending ancient Japanese culture against greedy, industrial modernity. In reality, the samurai class was far more complicated. Samurai were not simply noble philosophers, they were military aristocrats who had dominated Japanese society for centuries. And many reforms introduced by the Meiji government were not universally negative. Modernization helped Japan avoid colonization by Western powers and transformed it into one of the strongest states in Asia. In other words, history wasn't a simple battle between good tradition and bad modernization. Well, then there's Tom Cruise himself. Nathan Algren is fictional, but his character draws partial inspiration from several foreign military advisors who worked in Japan during this period, including French officers who helped train samurai rebels. Importantly, there was never an American Civil War veteran who became a samurai rebel leader in the way the film depicts. That's pure Hollywood. And yet, despite all of this, The Last Samurai succeeds in capturing something that I at least thought was kind of real, at least emotionally real. The film resonates because it explores this universal historical theme. What happens when an old world dies? And that's ultimately what the story is about here. The samurai weren't literally the last warriors in Japan, but they represented this end of an era, a society built on honor codes, you might say, hierarchy, and feudal traditions that suddenly collided with industrial modernity. And history is kind of full of moments like that. We have the fall of knights in Europe, or the collapse of aristocracies after World War One, the decline of cavalry in modern warfare. Entire ways of life can disappear within just one generation. And that's why The Last Samurai endures. Not because it's perfect or it perfectly recreates Japanese history, but I think because it taps into something that's human. This fear of modernization always leaving something behind. Kind of like what we're thinking about now with AI. Is it historically accurate? Only partially. But historically meaningful? Yeah, I would say so. Thank you so much for spending some time with me today and helping make this little show such a mighty success. If you're enjoying this show, would like to help with its production, you can always donate a few dollars at buymeacoffee.com or become a Patreon member to enjoy these episodes ad-free. Both of those links can be found on our website at www.historyshortspodcast.com. And also, don't forget to check out our YouTube channel where we have different videos and series that are not part of this main feed. Have a great rest of your day, and I will talk to you all again tomorrow.